Hello, hello, hello. I am Coach Jay, and I'm actually in my son's bedroom. Not that you would notice or care, but we have a lot of family coming in um, uh, today, actually. So we're trying to rearrange some things to make room. Anyway, I wanted to talk today about a little bit about addiction, the cycle of addiction, all about addiction. I want to tell you the beginning of the class, some of the things I'm going to say are my own findings with my own studies, with my own research. So take them as you may. I always start my class with a funny joke, funny dad joke. So today's is this. My boss told me that as a security guard, it's my job to watch The Office. So I'm on season 6, but I'm not sure what this has to do with security. But all right, if you want to take 2 deep healing breaths with me, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Our breathing definitely helps regulate our nervous system. So being in control of your breathing is very helpful. All right, so like I said, this first part are my own studies based on working years, probably well over a decade with those with addiction. So what I found with addiction, first of all, the onset. How does somebody get an addiction? And I call this, number one, the foundation. So there's either trauma, a pre-exposure to extreme stimuli. For example, you're 9 years old and you find a X-rated magazine. You're 10 years old and you find porno on the computer or a video pornography. That's pre-exposure to extreme stimuli. It's stimuli that the mind is not necessarily ready for. Overexposure to extreme stimuli. So let's just say there's young kids and they're around friends or family that are constantly talking about sex, in-depth sex. It could create a curiosity, could create that forbidden fruit. A negative belief system. This is where we start having this negative dialogue inside. Shame, unresolved conflict, abuse, low self-esteem. This all sets the foundation for an addiction to come in. Because an addiction, and I don't want to digress too much, but it is your worst best friend. It is a person's worst best friend. They're always there. They're always there to comfort you, to bring you peace and comfort and to calm your anxiety. But they do a lot of damage. So a stressor. So any type of emotional discomfort, expectations, fear of rejection, lack of sleep, anger, fear of failure, low self-esteem, emotional disconnection, feeling powerless. These are all things that can pull the trigger on an addiction. So somebody can have an addiction, not act on it, but a stressor is what's going to start that process. Which, speaking of trigger, brings me into number 3, is the trigger. And the trigger is a need to escape. It's a need to feel validation, a need to feel empowered, a need to numb, distract, avoid. So you got fired at work, or you got a big promotion at work, or you have a baby on the way. This could be the trigger to need external validation, to feel empowered, a need to escape. And then somebody would go into the next step, which is fantasize. So you're thinking of your reward of acting out. If I were to act out, I would walk away feeling validated, feeling empowered, feeling, whatever your reward is. Once you get into the fantasy mode, it's then number 5, obsessing. So you're looking for ways to fill your void or to feed your addiction. This is usually where we enter the fog stage. Our mind is pretty much hijacked at this point of obsession. Um, you're bordering an altered state. This is probably the area where you're already in the sinking sand. See, the before the obsession, there was the fantasy. That's getting into very dangerous territory, but you can still somehow something could happen. You know, the phone can ring or something can kind of get you out of that. Once you go into this obsessing mode, now you're trying to find ways to fulfill that addiction. The next one, number 6, would be disassociation. And again, I just want to say these were my findings based on the work and research that I did. So you're not going to find these anywhere. You're welcome to disagree with my findings, but I've been in this field quite a long time, and this is what I found to be pretty spot on. Number 6, disassociation. This is where you start separating yourself from your feelings. It also could be a time where you start separating yourself from yourself, because and this is controversial, but you know, a person who doesn't have an addiction, who's in a good space, wouldn't make the decisions they do if they're not in that addiction cycle, addiction sinking sand. Number 7 is the ritual, or what's called the acting out. This is this again could be done because somebody is in search of a high, an escape, to numb something, to feel validated, or just a release. So this is your ritual. This is how you address the problem that's within you. This is your food for your addiction. You're acting out, your ritual. What comes after that then, after the release, or after you drink the water, or in this case, the poison, guilt and remorse. Why did I do that? Why wasn't I strong enough? Why couldn't I prevent it from going this far? Shame, despair, and or depression can set in, such as I'm a cheater, I'm a failure, I'm weak, I hate myself. And then 10 are recommitments. I'm not going to do that again. There's promises to self. There's promises to look into more resources, more harder prayers to God, maybe attending SA meetings. I do want to say this, though. When you get into the 8th or 9th state of the addiction cycle, which is, you know, guilt and remorse set in, or shame, despair, depression, those are some scary places, because that's when it could actually get right back into that cycle again if you're not careful. Because what happens is that when we have shame and remorse and guilt, or even depression because we acted out, now we feel so bad about ourselves that now we need more so of that validation, that affirmation, that empowerment. So we go do it again, but all it does is add to the shame. And this is why it's called the addiction cycle. Oftentimes, guilt and shame added onto a new stressor is all that's needed to start the cycle again. That's what I basically just said. Unfortunately, slips and relapses are common in those recovering from sex addiction or porn addiction, etc. This does not mean that it is okay to slip or relapse, not by a long shot. Slips and relapses are setbacks to recovery and relationship healing. The good news about slips and relapses is that we can learn from them. By the way, I don't like the term slip. I'm just using the jargon of the territory, and I mean territory of, you know, what's written about as far as addiction. The good news about slips and relapses is that we can learn from them, tracing them to their root causes and implementing safeguards to prevent a recurrence. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the 3 circles. If not, Vivian just did a wonderful class explaining what the 3 circles are, and you can Google them. I don't want to take the time. But really, for a lot of addicts, the circles are very helpful. What is a slip? A slip is an unintended brief return to active addiction. With a slip, the addict quickly comes clean with their therapist, their spouse, their partner, their sponsor, and other important people in their life. Then, in conjunction with the sponsor, therapist, etc., the addict performs an autopsy to see where things started to go wrong and where they could have or should have intervened. And a relapse, so a slip, it's done, but it's you're honest and open. A relapse is a little bit more secretive, could potentially be longer term, could be a more longer return to the active behavior or addiction. With a relapse, an addict keeps their slip secret. The addict will tell lies and actively engage in other behaviors to cover up for their behavior. In short, the addict engages in denial to make their behavior seem okay in their own mind. One of the things that is very prevalent with addicts is they find ways to justify. This happens with compartmentalization. This happens with justification. This happens for a lot of reasons. So that's why you need an autopsy to say, okay, what happened? Where in that addiction cycle that I just mentioned, could I have stopped? Could I have put a stop? When I got a trigger, could I have went for a walk? When I got a stressor, could I have talked with my spouse? When you do an autopsy to ensure that these don't happen again. There are 5 primary elements to a slip or a relapse. There's the events, something happened in the addict's life. We kind of covered these in the beginning of the class. The feelings, the addict had a feeling or feelings about the event. There's a thought and a belief. The addict applies that meaning to the event and feelings. Denial or justification. The addict rationalizes a return to the addiction. I deserve A, B, and C. I work so hard. If something happened out of anger, it's like, well, he or she did this to me, so now I'm going to do this. I had a rough childhood and they don't understand, so I'm going to do whatever. None of these are good excuses or reasons whatsoever, but it's what the addict tells themselves to feel justified. And then the behavior, the addict acts out of their addiction. So these 5 elements must be examined when the addict returns from a slip or a relapse and conducts, like I told you before, an autopsy. As with an autopsy, after someone dies, we work backwards to determine the cause of what happened. Like a medical examiner, we start with the obvious, outward, readily apparent details, and then literally we dig deeper to find the root cause. We start with the obvious, I slipped or relapsed, and then you work backwards to dig deeper to find out. To this end, we look for the 5 elements mentioned above, like I just said, but working in reverse. So to end this, we just need to ask ourselves 5 questions. What behavior did I engage in when I acted out? How did I justify in my mind my desire to act out? This is a big one. This is a big one because we can talk ourselves into anything, honestly. I mean, think about it. If you really want to get real and raw, we're all one decision away from being in an orange jumpsuit. So, I mean, our metacognition, we need to think about what we're thinking about and stop it in its tracks. 3, what are the thoughts that cause me to want to act out? 4, what feelings cause me to think about acting out? Was I feeling inept? Was I feeling despair? Was I feeling depressed? Was I feeling anxious? Was I feeling disempowered? What were the feelings? So we can search those and kind of carve out the element of those feelings and fill it with something more healthy. And then 5, what events cause the emotional discomfort, the feelings? When those questions are answered, we reverse the order again to create a narrative of the slip or relapse. Generally, we end up with something like, my boss assigned an important project to my workplace rival rather than me. So maybe I felt disempowered. I felt unappreciated or undervalued. I hear this a lot with my coaching. When I'm coaching people that have cheated or people that are addicts, I hear this a lot. I feel very undervalued or unappreciated. Now, you might be watching this with your nostrils flaring, saying, well, my God, being an adult takes a lot of responsibility. I shouldn't have to pat you on the back every time you take out the trash. And I get that, but it has nothing to do with taking out the trash. It has a lot to do with not feeling heard as a child. And you take that into your adulthood. And then it just, it's the addiction cycle. 3, I thought other people were taking advantage of me. 4, I told myself, since I don't get the thanks or recognition at work, I'll get it by acting out. Which, if you're watching this and you have no idea about addiction, you're thinking that makes no sense, because you're going out pursuing something where you're going to wind up feeling shame and guilt. So it's like you're not getting recognition to do something to ultimately feel guilt and shame, but you'd be surprised what you would do for a temporary high. And that's with drugs, sex, or food, or anything else. And then 5, I went online and cruised hookup apps, and then I looked at porn. And what happens is, man, we start activating these pleasure sensors. Next thing you know, our brain is hijacked, and we're in a fog, and we're in our addiction cycle. So with this autopsy, the addict could now see the, quote, tipping point for their slip or relapse. Usually the easiest identifiable tipping point is the feelings stage of the process. So this is when the addict feels unappreciative and undervalued. Needless to say, this is the best place to intervene and stop acting and stop the acting out cycle, most likely by talking to another person, whether that be a friend, a sponsor, a spouse, a fellow recovering addict, a therapist, etc., who can give you a reality check on the situation. That way, the mind doesn't just continually spin out of control. The, quote, thinking stage of the process, other people taking advantage of me or what have you, is another good place to intervene, because by the time an addict slides forward into the denial stage, and that's where they're compartmentalizing and things like that, fantasizing, obsessing, averting a potential slip or relapse is quite difficult. Like I said, I want to conclude this class with something, some ways to, nip the triggers at their base. So when you feel triggered, or just so you understand, if you're watching this from your partner's perspective or point of view, who might be an addict, it's important not to get overwhelmed, which is why I say self-care. I say this all the time. Self-care is not vanity, it's sanity. Addicts cannot get overwhelmed with anxiety, with stress. They, in a lot of ways, their development was arrested at the age where, the addiction kind of was birthed and planted and born. So not getting overwhelmed. Now, you might be saying, well, that's just great. I don't have a spouse now to help me with life stressors. Not necessarily. They can get overwhelmed if they feel like they have intimacy and vulnerability and safety, and they can talk to you and whatever. In general, if they don't have that, once they get overwhelmed, it's easy to start that addiction cycle again, or to slip and relapse. So when you feel triggered, don't get overwhelmed. Just learn to ask the right questions. And some of these questions could be, what happened today or just now that did not go well? How do I wish things had gone better? How do I wish things had gone better? What did go well that I can build on? Because obviously you want to kind of do away with what doesn't work and build on what does. What will I do differently next time? Like I said, when you start to have these thoughts or temptations, do you get up and go for a walk? Do you go put your face in ice water? Do you go talk to your spouse? Do you call a coach? What do you do? How can I better prepare for the future situations that might be similar? If your boss tells you, he needs to talk to you at 11 o'clock, make sure at 10 o'clock, you're calling somebody and say, hey, can you check in on me at 11:30, or write in your journal before your meeting, or whatever. That way you're not marinating in that territory, or you're not tempted to do something after you have a talk with your boss if it happens to be bad news. And keep in mind, the nervous system often, well, Listen, our nervous system can't really tell the difference between almost a death and winning the lottery. It's still triggered, and your fight or flight or freeze or fawn or all those F's get triggered. So, being proactive with your nervous system, like I just said, with journaling or calling somebody or talking to somebody or praying or meditating or whatever's in your self-care box, tap into. So these questions can be a quick way to bring yourself into an honest reflection, and it helps prevent the mind from being hijacked, which leads to a slip up. So, I know this class, especially for people that don't understand addiction, was like bizarre, for lack of a better term. You might want to watch this a couple times if there's a lot of things that you didn't understand. And as always, never hesitate to reach out to me, and I can help you out in any area. But I hope you got something out of this class. Know, especially with somebody that struggles with an addiction, none of it's your fault. I mean, addictions happen usually very early in life, long before you get into a serious long-term relationship or marriage. So if somebody acted out and they have an addiction, I mean, acting out in general has nothing to do with you. But if somebody has an addiction, certainly has nothing to do with you in any capacity. So know you're not alone in your healing. Know that I'm proud of you. And until next time, God bless.